The mid-2000s was a time when reality TV's favorite idea was just to recreate Lord of the Flies, except instead of children on an island, they locked the most dysfunctional women they could find up in a house with the promise of them eventually dating someone famous. I mean, it took me a while to shake the feeling of arousal at the thought of one of these women scratching my face. Then The Office comes out, and Jenna Fischer, she descends like a dove. And I honestly think she surprised a lot of people who never thought that they would fall so deeply in love with such a lawful and motherly type of person. Baby, let's go to cooking class together. And sure, maybe some of you would rather keep your mental relationship with Pam Beesly platonic. Suit yourself. It's still pretty impossible to deny how real seeming and subtly funny that character really was, right? I mean, it was basically this solitary role that pushed her from being a struggling actress to being like a television icon. But I don't want to even argue, though, that work with The Office isn't even really her best work. Because what many may not know, shortly before The Office came out, Jenna Fischer had already accomplished something that most people in her industry never could do, which is, almost out of pure creative initiative, put together a short feature film almost completely from scratch, assigning herself for the very first time the director, writer, and producer credits, which is such a monumental task in and of itself, and I'm sure she had an idea at the time that she was never really going to get a very big paycheck out of this. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this project is before The Office pulled off this unique mockumentary style where, you have this faux documentary footage of a group of caricatures that satirized a white-collar work environment, what Jenna Fischer had ended up making was her own mockumentary with a faux news journalist team that's following around another group of caricatures, except this time they're satirizing the altruistic yuppies. Now, I'm not going to say that The Office copied her idea. I mean, if anyone owns this genre, it's going to be Christopher Guest, but that doesn't even really matter.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
The point is, she had already nailed the style that made The Office so memorable, except she did it with some chump change and without any real production experience beforehand. Now, to make things more interesting, at the time of making this, she was married to James Gunn. He's a guy who, with or without Jenna Fischer, has had a super interesting career. If you know him, it's likely from his more recent ascent into the Hollywood penthouse of Marvel Studios, where he directed both the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad. No thanks to Mike Cernovich. Look it up. And based on that recent career of his, you wouldn't have really got the idea that he had gotten his start with Trauma Entertainment, where he was actually apparently some kind of protege to the madman Lloyd Kaufman himself. Which briefly, if you're not familiar, is the man responsible for some of the most iconic, extreme lowbrow cinema of all time. We're talking The Toxic Avenger, Class of Nukem High, and Doggy Tales. Both Jenna Fischer and James Gunn have speaking parts in this, by the way. And it was under his guidance that James got his breakout job of writing the movie Romeo and Juliet, which I'm going to say is truly one of the most extreme comedies I've ever seen. And then he just kind of bizarrely goes on to write the live-action Scooby-Doo and its sequel.
Shaggy.
I can look at myself naked.
While almost at the same time wrote the Dawn of the Dead remake, and then just gratuitously drops this random awesome body horror movie Slither in 2006.
Handed me a piece of that possum over there.
So it was between Scooby-Doo 2 and Slither that his wife was going to be making this movie Lollilove. So he was recruited to not just lend his talents to this movie, but also utilizing his connection with Lloyd Kaufman to get this movie distributed. So that's right, Jenna Fischer's movie is a trauma movie. For me, this is just a crossover I just would not have believed back in 2006 when you see her making rounds on late night shows. Then we can just consider the fact that this is really a product being made both by somebody who is known for their decent persona and very subtle humor, and someone known for their indecency and maximal humor. So it's like before you even watch it, this movie is already super weird. So, in the behind the scenes, Jenna explains that she was involved in this fundraising dinner where people were paying $1,500 for a seat. And it turns out the vast majority of the money raised just went straight to the production of this fundraising event, which was all ordered to make the people donating feel good about what they were doing. And so based on that experience, she was inspired to make the subject matter of this movie targeted only towards mocking this entire culture of people. I'm just going to say, when your career brings you to that point where you find yourself at these types of fundraiser events, you only have a couple of choices on how to respond. You could either just dive in so deep to the gimmick that you crack your head at the bottom, or you can rise above it and silently conduct yourself with integrity, But the coolest reaction is making a whole movie just totally bent on satirizing the whole thing. So recognizing that she had all the necessary parts for her movie's universe in her own private life, she did the intuitive yet also sort of genius move of reusing her actual life in the making of this movie. I mean, going so far as to using their own personal home as the primary location for the movie. Her and James basically just made up character versions of themselves, including several of their industry friends, all of which simply go by their actual first names. There's one aspect where you could just say, well, that's really cool independent resourcefulness, but there's going to be this fascinating meta element that's going to be intrinsic to the whole movie, whether they wanted it there or not. So Jenna Fischer comes up with this plot where her and her husband are the most pitiful, self-indulged SoCal philanthropists you've seen who want to make the world a better place. And their great idea is Operation Lollilove.
Homeless individuals with a lollipop. But they're not just any lollipop, which would be great. Our lollipops feature uplifting slogans on the wrapper, and each wrapper features some of James's original artwork.
So not only is this premise of saving homeless people by giving them lollipops vapid enough to be funny on its own, the mockumentary style has this implicit joke that they thought the idea was so inspiring that they got a local news station to film a special on the production of it. A lot of what you get is Jenna and James doing improv gymnastics and finding increasingly outrageous ways of failing to mask their toxic mentality.
That a homeless person might see one of my artworks and it might change their worthless life into a life that has meaning, transformation.
For example, at the beginning, they are brainstorming together about what people group they want to help. And as they're mulling it over, they somehow find a way to subtly degrade just about every people group they can think of.
Kids with the, what do you call the, the rabbit-lipped kids?
Cleft palate.
The kids with the cleft palates.
And I want to say that Jenna Fischer has pretty much proven over and over again in everything she's been in that she's amazing at integrating mannerisms and quirks that many of us have seen in real people in our lives. And in this movie, she manages to capture the mannerisms of just so many different types of annoying people that I've been forced to be around in my life. For instance, she confidently declares that the first step to this project is
to find a corporate sponsor.
And she gives us her best fundraising voice, hopelessly trying to get people enthused for some project that they just don't care about.
Hey, how are you? May I please speak with your mom or dad?
And then, of course, the ongoing joke is the veneer eventually cracks and all the chaos just kind of pours out of her.
Excuse me? Why don't you go f yourself, cocksucker?
I hope you find this opportunity to see Jenna Fischer cuss someone out as satisfying as I do. I don't know why, I just feel like I could fall asleep to her berating people for some reason. But she continues to come up with so many lines that perfectly represent someone oblivious to how other people don't think she's as important as she thinks she is. Even when she sounds like she's about to say something valid, she finds a way to completely ruin it.
It's not about me, it's about the people. It's about the people who are suffering. No, I don't want to start a charity just because something bad happened to me. No, oh no, I got breast cancer. Oh no, my kid was kidnapped. Let me start a TV show.
There's a great scene where they invent their real-life friends, Jason Segel and Linda Cardellini, out to lunch, who I think were also, interestingly, just before the brink of a much larger success at the time of this being made. You might recognize Linda Cardellini as Hot Thelma from the Scooby-Doo movie that James wrote, but prior to that were known as the Freaks and Geeks power couple. And they start the whole thing by trying to convince them of how close of friends they are when that feeling obviously wasn't mutual.
We do consider you our best and our dearest friends. Wow. Not to mention the wealthiest. And
we consider you guys definitely friends, you know.
We like you.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about their project, and Linda has this idea of making it cheaper by just using toilet paper. And look at her reaction to this idea.
Toilet paper. Why don't you guys just use toilet paper?
Yeah, I mean, really. You have to draw a little picture, make sure it's not just...
And then they proceed to ask for a donation.
the operation will cost about $250,000.
And they nail yet another very real-life thing. They play the obvious salesman desperately refusing to accept what their client is trying to say to them.
$250,000 out of our pockets to hand suckers out to homeless
So
people.
what you're saying is you're open to the idea, but you're not convinced.
I mean, have you ever tried to stop and talk to a Greenpeace person on the street? This is what that's like. So looking at James Gunn again for a second, I've already pointed out his roots in like the much more darker sense of humor that he might have. So naturally, his performance is a little more flamboyant and, well, grotesque. After all, this is the man who's partially responsible for sneaking weed jokes in the Scooby-Doo movie.
Talk about toasted.
Regardless of how flippant Jenna has been in this, wait until James is given an opportunity to show the art he has been working on.
The name of this particular piece is You Matter.
And he just starts to go way off the rails with this monologue of him revealing just mounds of internalized prejudice as he explains his art.
Psyche. A bum looks at this and says, oh wow, this is what I look like. I look like this guy that's got flies all around my head. I've got smells coming out of me. I got googly eyes going in different directions. And oh wow, I must be a big, huge piece of crud.
And it just continues to ramp up and up as it goes on. And boy, does it go on.
A mascot that I've created, his name is Felix. He's created to tune into the Latino community. I have this guy named Mustafa. He's a Muslim. He's somebody who's anti-terrorism. I think that if the 9/11 guys had seen Mustafa giving them a positive slogan before they got on those planes, they would have said, gents, this is not a good idea.
And there's also a couple other scenes that he has mixed in, which I just have to assume he's responsible for. Like this idea of one of their volunteers being a domestic abuse survivor.
Lollilove would just help me feel so empowered around men.
I mean, watching Jenna squirm as she watches this man when he starts to truly lose control is one of the best parts of this whole movie. But looking specifically at James for a second, using his unique style, he was able to parody a whole other set of people that belong in this culture that Jenna couldn't quite capture. His whole thing is that he's a successful art fart, and he comically has the solitary role of designing the wrapper of the lollipop. Watching him parody an artist who feels very confident in their performative creative process was pretty satisfying to watch. I'm telling you, if you've ever been to an art walk of any kind in a very young, artsy city, you know what this is. But beyond just that rapper responsibility, he also kind of volunteers the typical artist delusional philosophies.
With James, I mean, like James has his thing with germs, and if we're going to do this, we're going to have to confront that. I mean, if we do it, you're going to have to confront that.
Well, awareness of germs other people don't have. But it's a blessing. I have a second sight when it comes to germs, which protects me. I'll probably live to be a very old man because I don't touch dirty things.
Most of this movie, it's development people who are clearly communicating to these two that the idea was silly and didn't require a corporate sponsorship. And he has the power to dismiss all feedback with his visionary insights.
She was disgusting and the idea for Lollilove was demeaning. And I think that that's a good sign myself. She's a little bit bummed out about it, but you know, all great ideas face a lot of adversity.
So something to revisit is that at the time of making this, Jenna and James were a married couple, and they're, well, playing a married couple. Now, obviously, they're playing silly characters, but the parallelism is pretty glaring. The movie is about a woman who isn't working much and is married to someone successful, and they band together to take on this private project, which is, well, pretty much exactly the circumstances behind the two of them making this movie. Which, of course, is another very complex layer that's added to this movie on top of what we already have. And the reason I bring this up is because midway through, the theme sort of shifts from how shallow they are and starts to focus more on the marriage itself.
You don't want to take out the trash. You don't want to call the sprinkler man. You don't want to do anything.
No, I don't.
Their bad personalities crash and things start to fall apart, and they manage to recreate relationship tension in a way that may be surprisingly familiar to the many who have experienced a crisis in their own marriage. And obviously, we can't assume that this is a direct reflection of their real relationship completely. And no, the fact they got divorced a couple years later is not relevant at all. I guess I just don't think it's likely that they could nail this level of authenticity without a little inspiration.
No one said marriage would be easy, Jenna.
I know.
It takes a lot of work.
I know.
And I just feel like the synchronicity couldn't help itself, because there's a revealed moment where Jenna is talking about a time where James couldn't stop with his shock humor when she wanted something more orderly.
What's the request, honey?
My request is that you not reference any fucking in the ass, especially of me, because my parents wouldn't like it.
And I feel like this just must have been symbolic of something, because this specific conflict takes up like 7 minutes of a 30-minute behind-the-scenes video.
I asked James once, please don't mention any anal sex in this scene. Okay. He did it again.
Mwah!
No, I can't. He did her in the ass. Dude, that's fucking ridiculous.
But all in all, when you're watching this, you sort of get this idea that what you're seeing is very vulnerable somehow. I mean, they even used their actual factual wedding photos in this movie for everyone to see because of how hilarious they thought they were.
Like a 7-year-old girl, and I look like a pedophile with my heart-on rubbing against her chest. And I thought that was the creepiest thing I ever saw. And those terrible photos for us were a godsend to the movie because we used a lot of them.
And I'm not going to leave out this legendary moment either.
know this about me, but I used to be a model. That industry was so selfish that I had to get out of it.
But I think with all this together, the vulnerability and boldness did put a lot of depth to the comedy, which I think very easily could have just come off as smug and dry. And also, this whole relationship edge really gave these characters some further opportunity to parody people's toxicity in a way that goes a lot further than just their superficiality. It all starts when Jenna finally gets accepted to give a presentation to a corporate prospect, and she goes to James requesting his artwork for the design, and this is his response.
Well, he wants to see prototypes of the lollipop, so I'm gonna go take your artwork, I'll have it scanned, I'll just make up like some mock-up wrappers or something.
There's one problem, is that this thing really didn't seem to be going anywhere, so I stopped working on it a couple days ago.
So we get a classic montage of an all-nighter of Jenna trying to move mountains, with these appropriately ridiculous shots of James doing quite the opposite. And all these non-committal lines he's constantly dishing out are just beyond perfect for that flaky creative type that ends up lashing out when they're actually faced with real responsibility.
That's just, if you have any idea of when you think you will be done.
There's when it'll be done exactly in the amount of time it takes to do it.
And at the end of this long task, Jenna finally feels good about what she came up with, and her optimism is really just kind of setting you up for a very intense roller coaster of cringe. And then when they actually sit down, it turns out that James was responsible for bringing the actual lollipops to show, but didn't.
I think really the only last thing to do is to see the lollipops.
The lollipop. The powers in the pops,
Let's
right?
hope so.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
I think they're in that bag.
No, that's just my stuff.
They're
on the table.
Right?
And shamelessly throws Jenna under the bus.
I know Jenna should have remembered the lollipops, okay? But if you could just humor me for 1 minute.
And then, of course, they want to keep stacking things. So not only does James flirt with this girl right in front of Pam in the most aggressive way I've seen in a long time.
I mean, we could really use somebody who's just very, very attractive and bubbly and vivacious. And I saw you earlier and I was like, wow, who's that? I mean, it's really, you made an impression, and I think you make an impression upon
And I have to repeat, I feel like it's kind of obvious that at this point, Jenna Fischer kind of is aware that one of her greatest strengths in acting is shrinking inside. And I guess I don't know how good I feel about liking it so much. But then also, James takes the opportunity to make him seem like the genius that carried helpless Jenna through the whole project.
You're just angry because I shined like a star up there and you sunk straight to the bottom like a $10 rock.
Which leads to a fight where we get another beautiful opportunity to hear Jenna cuss somebody out.
Right now. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
And then James just persists in his mental manipulation in ways that might make some people really cringe in a bad way.
Truth is that you're right. I haven't been pulling my weight. I've been afraid if I show my true and whole self that I'll overpower you. And today in the office, when I showed myself with Larry, I did. I overpowered you. But I've realized that's the essence of our marriage. And I promise I will not hide myself any longer, okay?
If it does, I feel like it's only because he's capturing behavior that's real in our life. And then the crowning jewel of the whole movie, the time where they actually go through LA and give lollipops to real homeless people. Not before a photo shoot, of course. And it's kind of at this point where you feel like you've been on a roller coaster that maybe is a little more scary than you thought it was going to be, and you're about to hit the final drop. I mean, the amount of complexities have piled up, and now we're going to see them actually do the project that they sought out to do. Now, to be clear, they explain that as they went through, the producers were running ahead and asking people if they'd like to sign a release, and we're also told that the project that they were going to be filming for was supposed to be funny, so that kind of softens the edge of how the whole thing looks. But they also mention many of the moments that transpired were things that they couldn't have possibly planned.
That when I finish with it, I will be able to make contact with the real God, a God made of meat that requires a machine to move about from place to place, and requires a radio transmitter in order for you to talk to it.
Of course, they continue to offer their over-the-top quips to keep it in the context of this mockumentary.
We've come down here to help the homeless, and it's a little disappointing because they're all asleep. I mean, I wish they would just grow up and wake up and take a lollipop.
And then we get the final and perfectly placed punchline for this entire movie. And again, I want to be clear, this man actually was a real actor, and he, well, acts in a way that didn't quite match their idea of a homeless person.
Your bloody gash. I'm gonna stab your bloody cash.
And it's at this infraction that the whole act just falls apart, and everything about them that they've ineffectively tried to conceal about themselves this whole time just pours out as the local news station camera continue to roll on them.
Why'd you have to spit on him? These people.
And after the smoke settles, tying up the bow to the whole documentary being made, we get their reflections 3 months later, where, in perfect conclusion to the movie, they seem to have reverted to the exact same people they were at the beginning.
Not really accurately seeing how many dangers the homeless actually presented. We knew about the bacterial danger, but not about the physical danger.
So a few final thoughts. This is one of the coolest examples of top-notch quality, making a project purely for the sake of the creativity. For almost everyone in this is one of the rare examples where they got to do exactly what they wanted to do and weren't being told by anyone else. The work and the creativity that went into this is definitely recognizable. The humor hits hard, and if she did nothing else other than this, I still think she deserves the title of an artist.